Welcome everyone to the ICN Spotlight today. My name is Andreas Mundt. I'm the head of the German Bundeskartellamt in Bonn, and I'm chairman of the ICN steering group. You know that the ICN consists of more than 140 members from all continents, and we're doing this series of ICN Spotlight, a series of informal one-to-one interview sessions already for quite a while. I'm very happy that today Doris Tshepe is joining us. Doris is the commissioner of the Competition Commission of South Africa. She was appointed in September 2022. She has lots of experience. She has been a practicing attorney for more than 20 years. She served on an advisory panel on the major amendments of the Competition Act in South Africa. She is an ICN steering group member, and the Competition Commission of South Africa has traditionally been a very active ICN member. It has had several leadership positions. It has been an event host, a project lead, and by the way, it has been a founding member of the ICN many years ago. So, Doris, many thanks for joining us today, and I think everyone is looking forward to our chat that we're going to have today. We have kicked off this series of town halls in February 2016. The first session was on public interest considerations in merger review. And as a speaker, we had Harding Atsizuzu, the Deputy Commissioner and head of the Mergers Division at the Competition Commission in South Africa. And we have learned then, already many years ago, that the Competition Commission South Africa can block a merger based solely on public interest factors, which makes the South African Competition Commission a bit unique worldwide in a certain way. The Competition Act is a means, I quote, to provide all South Africans equal opportunity to participate fairly in the national economy. So, Doris, you have served on an advisory panel on the major amendments to the Competition Act. These amendments were introduced in February 2019, and the Competition Act was amended to better equip the Competition Commission to contribute to inclusive economic growth. So can you share precisely how these amendments promote inclusive growth and how they improve on the version between before 2019. So, Doris, many thanks for being with us today. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Andreas. It's an absolute pleasure to be here to join you on the spotlight. And you are correct. We have been having this conversation not only in South Africa but globally in most of this fora on the unique nature of competition law in South Africa. But as I always say, our view is competition law and policy is context specific. And we see that most authorities or most legislatures have competition law that respond to their circumstances. And what is the context in South Africa? In 1994, when a democratic elected government was elected or came into power and decided to go to promulgate a new competition law, we were as a country inheriting an economy that was highly concentrated, but also exclusionary in nature, mainly of the majority of the people. Therefore, it made sense that as you are establishing a competition law, you had to do so to respond to that context. In that way, our competition law, as you correctly say, doesn't only speak to consumer welfare, but it has a transformative component to it. Before the amendments, there were public interest provisions were only in relation to merger regulation and even in exemption provisions. However, once the 2019 amendments came into effect, we saw an introduction of public interest provision, not only enhancing them within the major regulation provisions, but also moving out of the major regulation into some provisions on abuse of dominance, but also another tool which existed but had not been needed some enhancement, and that is market inquiries.
Yeah.
So in the major regulation, particularly, we amended to ensure that there is an enhancement for participation and entry participation and growth of small, medium enterprises and firms that are owned by historically disadvantaged person. So those two became, and workers. So those two became the provisions in major regulations that we tried to include as part of enhancing inclusion into the economy by those who had been excluded.
Okay. Doris, I mean, it's always the same, you know, that as the head of a competition agency, when the law is changed and amended, there's a lot of pressure on you that you make something out of it.
Yes.
We're just having an amendment here in Germany these days, and now you can read in all the newspapers. Now it's on Mundt to implement it, you know, so that is left to me. So I can imagine that part of your mandate as the head of the competition agency, the new head, or not so new anymore, but still not for such a long time, that is to ensure that the amendments are implemented effectively. That is part of your job, I guess. So can you give, to make it more lively, can you give me some examples on how these amendments have impacted your work and how they have impacted the outcome of your work?
So the one area, and interestingly, the amendments came, and as soon as they came, we also were hit by COVID. So it's quite interesting that the Commission, despite those challenges, were able to already start implementing the amendment. So in the main area has been in measure control. So we've had to amend forms for the kind of information you want, because you want to ensure that as we assess measures, we ensure that there is a promotion of greater spread of ownership by SME, by firms owned by historically disadvantaged individuals and workers. So that has been the one area where there has been a great impact. There has been big measures in South Africa. The Heineken Distill measure in particular has been one where you would have seen the measure raising both competition and public interest provision, and where the Commission in effect recommended a divestiture given the competition concerns there, but also included within that public interest conditions to ensure that we promote the greater spread of ownership, both by historically disadvantaged individuals and by workers. Interestingly, within the divestiture, the structural remedy, one of the issues was to ensure entry. We wanted that entry, whoever would be buying the divested entity, to also be to have HDI, historically disadvantaged individual within the firms that would be writing that. So we find that on that matter in particular is you can infuse issues of competition and public interest, particularly where it is about entry and participation and growth, because in fact, the two work hand in hand.
Okay. And tell me, Doris, we always have this debate also here in Europe, in Germany to a certain extent, if we should include some issues that go beyond competition into our decision. So I understood from what I know about South Africa that there are cases maybe where you intervene, maybe solely based on public interest matters and not so much on competition matters. So what is your personal view on that? Is the Competition Commission the right authority to handle this, or would that better be left to another institution that takes care of these issues, or would it even maybe better be left to a political instance that would take the decision? So it's a bit of a personal question, how you take that, because I assume that is a lot of responsibility on your shoulders if you take these decisions that are maybe founded more on public interest than on competition.
Thanks, Andreas. Look, personally, I think that we have managed as a country to strike a correct balance, the necessary balance. In my view, for an authority of our nature to actually have public trust that we are in fact opening an economy that should be inclusive, that should grow, and grow in a manner that benefits all South Africans, as you were reading, these matters need to be included. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean there are no other entities that will be tackling some of those issues, but the issues of transformation and inclusion are big enough for all of us to participate, and where possible, to be able to have an impact. Measure control will be one of those instances where approvals are necessary, and as an entity, we should be able to assist in that. So personally, I think it's a big task, requires a lot of resources, a lot of correct balancing act, but a necessary one nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we turn a little bit to the food sector, Doris, because also, first of all, this is a big issue. One can say for the time being in all continents, around the world, wherever you go, but maybe even a bit more in South Africa or in the African continent. I know that you do work in this area, and I understand that you have conducted an extensive concentration study in 2021 to determine, the extent of market concentration on South Africa's markets. That was not only on food, but on many other markets as well. And I believe that you have established that 70% of the 144 industries you assessed were highly concentrated in South Africa, and only 10% of the sectors were found to be not so concentrated. Among the various sectors that you have highlighted in your report, well, especially the food value chain showed concerning trends, if I got it right, which indicate that small farmers were being squeezed by input producers and processors. So since that time, have you made intervention in these markets to try and address the food value chain?
Interestingly, Andreas, the Competition Commission during COVID, you will recall, we saw a high level of price increases in food, especially in essential food markets. What the Commission then decided to also do was to monitor that, and as a proactive measure to ensure that consumers, particularly low-income consumers, would be mostly affected by unnecessary high rising prices of food, would be protected. And they were monitoring that and seeing and intervening, particularly with price gouging cases where that has been the case. So that was the one area of both advocacy and research, but also when necessary, then intervening. And that intervention resulted in some of the cases even going through the competition tribunal. But what the Commission has also done is to launch a fresh produce market inquiry. And that market inquiry is to look at the issues you've raised on the value chain, almost from farmer to consumer, and the chain, the value chain across. And that is because that is such a big market, we have chosen to do it only in respect of a number of vegetables and a number of fruits, but that is, we chose those that make up about 70% of the market. And Deputy Commissioner Hadin Rachisusu is actually the chair of that market inquiry. It is still in the information gathering stages of the inquiry, and will soon have public hearings to be able to deal with that. The market inquiry, as I said earlier, is one of the new tools that has been enhanced. And one of the issues we also will be looking at in that area, over and above just the features of the market, is also participation by SMEs and firms from historically disadvantaged area, particularly emerging farmers in that regard.
Well, many thanks, Doris. Just from a personal point of interest, just very briefly, we are just expanding our possibilities of conducting market inquiries, and we will have very far-reaching opportunities after such a market inquiry to divest companies, even without a breach of competition law. So my quick question would just be, what kind of means and instruments do you have if you find a market failure or if you find an infringement of competition law in a sector inquiry?
So the market inquiry tool was there before the 2019 amendments, but what we found was that we would make recommendations, and parties, either government or a market participant, had an opportunity whether or not to implement the recommendations, although in some of them they were actually implemented. So what we sought to do was to amend the Act to ensure that the Commission, having conducted the market inquiry and made findings, it can then issue remedies to deal with that. There is even a clause on divestiture that we could have, because this would be market structures. It's not individual conduct of firms, but the market structure as a whole. And in those instances, we have put in a system where were we to recommend or were we to ask for a divestiture, there is a process through the tribunal, because that's a far-reaching remedy to do. So there is some protection of going through the tribunal to ensure that that is done.
Okay, so but this from the point of view, a sector inquiry is an important tool.
It is an important tool.
It can have heavy consequences for the companies in the very end if they are subject to such a sector inquiry. Earlier, you talked about your public interest regime, Doris, and from what you said, You have expanded in 2019 to cover the economy's need for a greater spread of ownership amongst workers and historically disadvantaged people, persons in South Africa. Well, I can imagine that if you do that, you need new concepts, you need new ideas, you need maybe new organizational issues. So I wonder, I mean, we also here in Bonn, we are in a constant change with new tasks, and I wonder how you manage that in South Africa. I can imagine that you have experienced some challenges in implementing these very specific amendments, and that you must have thought early on about possible solutions to these challenges. So how did you manage that?
It's work in progress. And I think where it comes from, those challenges, the new concepts and all, it's also about business certainty, because you want the market participants to know how are we going to be assessing some of these concepts. And so in the past, when we have guidelines on public interest issues broadly, on employment, on the other components of public interest in Section 12A of the Competition Act. What we're trying to do now is to have to amend those guidelines to give guidance on this clause on promotion of greater spread of ownership by SMEs and HDP firms, so that there is some certainty. We had hoped to do that sooner, but the concepts themselves are quite complex and require, in fact, us to engage in some decision making and see what sort of areas come and what kind of decisions we're able to make. So it's actually been a useful thing to continue implementing, so that when we provide guidelines, we're providing guidelines informed by some experience and decision making. Obviously, the guidelines are easier to amend as and when new concepts or new challenges come in. But I think that experience that we have gained over time as we are implementing the provisions have been quite helpful. The other areas where we are finding that guidelines may be helpful has been in the amendments to some of the abuse of dominant cases, provisions in the Act. We have introduced different legal standards on price discrimination. We have introduced new provisions on buyer power, and what we are doing has been an advocacy program to ensure that in respect of both buyer power and price discrimination, there are regulations, there are guidelines that enable both market participants, the smaller suppliers and the bigger businesses, to understand what is expected, what kind of conduct is expected of them. We're not seeing a lot of uptake on the, at least on the buyer power, but we understand it's as a result of the dynamics in the power relations. So we are in full force with a useful advocacy unit to try and get the word out, and have issued some very interesting videos and interesting pamphlets targeted at the firms themselves, the dominant, what would be dominant firms themselves, but also the smaller suppliers in particular, to ensure that if there are those cases, they can come through to the Commission.
Yeah. I find price discrimination with regard to the African continent a very important issue. I've discussed that with Thembi Nkosi and others as well. Can you maybe just elaborate a little bit on how you proceed cases if you do that? For example, do you take international price development into account if you look into price discrimination? Because I do believe the price discrimination for the African continent is a huge problem. So maybe just a few words on that.
Yes, I want to concentrate on the amendments, because what the amendments tried to do was mainly to try and have a different legal standard, because if it is about small businesses and the effect on substantiality would be very little. And we would have seen it in the past, where the courts will tell you that there is no substantial lessening or prevention of competition. So what we have done then in the amendment to Section 9 is to use a lesser standard in relation to SMEs, so that in respect of those cases, you are able to, where there is a discrimination, that you are able to still show that the impact on small business is still significant and not substantial necessarily in the general understanding of an SLP as a standard. The Act has also tried to ensure that there is no some avoidance. So the Act prohibits or almost, you cannot refuse to deal with a small business in order to avoid the provision of a lower standard in relation to small businesses. So we're trying to spread the word to small businesses, to explain these provisions to them in a way that enables them to understand this and able to bring these cases. We currently have a case, in fact, which on price discrimination, which is being investigated, which we're hoping soon to refer to the Competition Tribunal.
Okay, many thanks. Well, maybe we turn a bit to energy, Doris.
Yes.
Energy is a big issue around the world, and also lots of similarities between South Africa and Germany here, because it is a huge issue in Germany. And I know that it is also in South Africa for the time being. You had some electricity cuts and some rolling blackouts just lastly, which always does have a negative effect on growth of the economy. So given your agency's purpose to support economic growth, I wonder if the Competition Commission is looking into these issues, if you try to contribute to the solution of the crisis, or if that is left more or less to the energy regulator, which you have as well, of course, in South Africa, or if you cooperate in this sense. So how do you proceed when you see such a problem, and how do you try to contribute to the situation?
Thank you, Andreas. I mean, this has been a big problem, the energy crisis in the country. And in fact, at the beginning of the year, you would recall, government declared a national state of disaster, which was subsequently withdrawn. But as agencies of government, we were required to look, how do we assist government in order to resolve some of this, given the mandate each of us as entities would have. And there are a couple of interventions we've had to deal with. One has been to assist the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition in issuing what we call block exemptions. And these block exemptions have been mainly to users of energies in instances where they could enter into some collaborative work in order to deal with supply constraints, or to help with creating or reducing utilization of supply. So we allowed, because the risks in relation to users would be a lot less, there'll be less collaboration that may contravene the Competition Act, so that we have allowed in a way that, in fact, it's almost automatic. All they need to do is to inform the minister and the authority, and we're then able to assess whether that does not contravene the act, and we can deal with that. We also allowed another one on suppliers, but in respect of that one, we actually require that when they do, they must submit whatever agreements that they would enter into, because there is a risk there of some collaboration. So there we've had to be a little bit strict, but that was another way of trying to deal with the supply constraint, because the reason we're having all these blackouts is the constraint that we have to the grid. The second intervention has been through enforcement, and what we are seeing there is that particularly in the other alternatives to electricity, be it gas, renewables, or in the form of solar, wind, and all the other energy alternatives. There has been a lot of activity, and we have been investigating some of the cases, either excessive pricing cases. There is one that we have been investigating, and has different dynamics, particularly to the point you were raising, because we do have NESA as a sector regulator who determines some of the pricing, and the question will always be, because we have concurrent jurisdiction as the competition authority and NESA, how do those fit in? The Competition Act allows for that, for concurrent jurisdiction, and the sector regulator and the competition authority are then allowed to enter into a memorandum of understanding to regulate how they will engage with one another in instances where there is concurrent jurisdiction. So there is an MOU between the Competition Commission and NESA to deal with that. The last area of intervention has been in mergers. There has been a lot of activity in mergers. And what we are, at the moment, there are not areas of concern, but what we need to be looking out as competition authorities is to ensure that as this activity is happening, the sector is developing in a way that it is competitive. So that has been a key issue that we're trying to do to ensure that we don't find ourselves in a world where there may be some anti-competitive behavior following a lot of transactions that have happened through mergers and acquisition. It's still a new area, but we are monitoring it, and an advocacy role here still continues. We're having our advocacy division, almost trying to understand the industry, who are the participants, particularly that we're seeing a lot of global firms coming into that sector.
Which can be competitive. I mean,
this
is always the big question. I mean,
yes,
we have experienced lots of difficulties in Germany to bring competition, at least in certain areas of the energy sector. That is not easy, but of course, it's the best way to lower prices as always, and to get good quality in this sense, make no blackouts, I would say.
No blackouts, and that's where we need to be. Blackouts do affect growth and firms, and so we do need to get to a place where these are dealt with, and sustainably so.
Yeah. Maybe we already come to a close, Doris, but maybe in the very end, some words on international cooperation. South Africa, the Competition Commission is extremely experienced in international work in the competition sector. You are, I can say, an essential pillar of the ICN. you are a member of the African Competition Forum, the ACF, amongst other organizations. I know that right now you are in Geneva to participate in the IGE meeting at UNCTAD that is taking place this week. So maybe you can share some experience from your view as the head of the South Africa Competition Commission. What is how do you see your role in this? How can you contribute also maybe as one of the key pillars of competition agencies on the African continent to include and to attract African competition agencies to this international work? How do you see your role there?
Thank you, Andreas. South Africa is a proud founding member of both the ICN and the African Competition Forum, and we have continuously actively participated in both. I will start with ACF, and it has been a growing forum of competition agencies in South Africa. We have recently just welcomed the Rwandan Competition Authority into the fold. The work has been quite phenomenal, very collaborative. One of the goals of the founders of ACF was to try and create research, collaborative research on the continent from the agencies, by agencies, that agencies can use to determine enforcement areas. And I'm proud to say, Andreas, that we have had a number of research projects happening in many industries from ACF membership, and most members participating, and we found a lot of value. And this has been significant, especially with the creation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And as you know, there is a competition protocol that is being established through the AFC, I never get this right, AFCFTA. And we need to find how, as ACF, we help in the implementation of the protocol once it's been formally adopted and implemented. And in this regard, we have research happening currently by some ACF members on dominance threshold, on measure threshold, that may be implemented once the Continental Competition Authority is established. So there has been a lot of work happening there, a lot of training by various authorities as amongst themselves, and a lot of learning across the board. There has been, ICN has been very helpful, UNCTAD has been very helpful in the work of the ACF. But I need to congratulate the agencies themselves on the commitment on the ACF and the work that the ACF does. It is critical. We do need to see a lot of intertrade within the continent, and establishing a coherent competition law and policy on the continent will assist as we create this, because we don't want the gains we have of a cross-border trade to be affected by anti-competitive practices. So this is quite key for us. On ICN, we're very happy to our continued work on the ICN is there, and we intend to continue to participate. We do, as you know, all the time, Andreas, this will be my issue, to ensure that issues that are affecting developing countries and authorities that are engaged in there should continue to be at the forefront of conversations that we are having. within ICN, the broadening of the membership. I know you have been at the forefront of ensuring that that happens, and you've said it even at the beginning of this conversation. So we are in full support of that, but we do need to see a lot of the conversations and research work that are relevant also to this and to these agencies in developing areas. I mean, I suppose it's also up to us to also do so. I mean, if you try and see research on employment and its implication in major regulations, we're not seeing a lot of that. And I think it's issues on food, on agro-processing, on agriculture, which are affecting everyone, but predominantly the developing world. We need to have those at the forefront of our conversation. So that's where we see ourselves, and we want to continue to do so, to ensure that there is greater collaboration, and not only in learnings, but also in enforcement areas as well. Yeah, but it's been good to be part of the community. I think there has been great benefits for us as an entity.
We will see what we can do more in this respect, Doris.
Yes.
I have met on several occasions with the with the board or other representatives of the African Competition Forum, for example, on the margins of the Global Forum of the OECD in Paris. Well, I think we must find ways how we can even better collaborate. And one thing is very important for me, Doris, that is, we learn from each other. Because I mean, we live in different environments, social, cultural, economical, but as heads of competition agencies, we very often face the same challenges. And here, sometimes I have often seen that I can learn as much from you as you from me. So it is not a one-way issue. It's really for both of us. So, Doris, we have come to a close. I'm extremely sorry. I could have continued with you.
I know.
More time. It's so interesting to hear about very practical issues in South Africa and how you're dealing with your job. And we had a great list of topics. And well, we will meet again all together in Spain, in Barcelona.
Indeed.
We will meet in Nairobi in Kenya for the advocacy workshop. Very happy that we go back to Kenya and to Nairobi. And Doris, all the best to you. Many, many thanks for these very interesting insights into your work. And I wish you a good time now at the IGE meeting in Geneva. And of course, I hope to see you soon, and we'll continue this. And we take that very serious, what you said about not only Africa, but other countries who face severe problems for the time being, and that we can do also as the ICN what we can do to help in this situation and to get things better. So many, many thanks, Doris. I wish you all the best and see you soon. Many thanks, and many thanks to everyone who has been listening to us. I hope to see you soon as well. Goodbye.
Thank you, Andreas. Thank you for the interview.
Bye.
Goodbye.